All right, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you all for joining us today for the third and final session of the Adults with Disability or Developmental Disability series by Kevin Fitzgerald. Today's session is again an hour and a half, and you'll have the chance to earn 1.5 CEUs by answering the poll questions that will be popping up throughout the presentation today. So make sure that you are logged into a computer to answer those poll questions if you need your CEs. Oh, everyone needs their CEs because you purchased. So if you have any questions, I did send out an email earlier this morning with like the handouts and everything. So if you did not get them, then you can download them from your taskbar or your control panel there. Um, and if you can't for whatever reason, feel free to send me an email and I could send them to you afterwards as well. And if you have any questions throughout the presentation at all, there is also a questions box in the taskbar there. So you can just put them in and we'll have a chance for Q&A during and after the presentation as well. But I think for now, that's all I have to say. So I'm going to shut my camera off and turn it over to Kevin.
Thanks, Marissa, so much. And thank you, everyone, for joining again today. I'm not sure what the future holds. We're saying this is the last of what's been, I think, actually 12 or 13. If you follow this whole thing from the beginning, I think we've had 12 or 13 webinars on various topics. And today might be the swan song. I don't know. We'll see what the future holds after today. But I thought a fitting way to end the series. Just a little bit about me, pretty uninteresting, but I'll just give you a little bit of my background. When I got out of graduate school in 1986, I had never worked with my background was in clinical psychology. I was going to pursue my doctorate at Duke University. It's a long story. And then life gets in the way, as we all know. Isn't it funny how that happens? Things happen. There's another way of using that expression, but I'm not going to be vulgar, but things happen. And I got out of graduate school and I immediately found that I needed to get a job because I needed to get a job, and I was recently married, and I found out that my ex-wife was expecting twins. And she wasn't supposed to be able to conceive children. What did I know? So all of a sudden, in a full-blown panic, I said I had to put my academic career on hold, obviously, but I had to get a job, and I had to get a job quick. And I wasn't really prepared to enter the job market at that point because I was pursuing academia. I was a research guy. I fantasized that I might be a professor someday in some snooty institution, making a nice salary and teaching people. And that's what I always aspired to do. And I ended up applying for a job for an agency in Waterbury, Connecticut. Never forget it. And it was for the position of Director of Services for people with mental retardation. Back in the day when you could say mental retardation and it was acceptable. And to basically make a long story short, I knew nothing about people with mental retardation. Sometimes, even to this day, I wonder how much do I know about folks. But I really knew nothing back then. And I went in for the interview. I put on a nice suit. Went in for the interview. Totally bullshitted my way through the interview. Trust me, I had no idea what I was talking about. I must have put on a good facade because they hired me. And I'll never forget, I'd never even been around people with disabilities. That wasn't what I was pursuing. And I'll never forget the first day I reported for work and all of these people started to come into the building. We had some mobile work crews. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but we had a diversity of programs. It was actually a pretty interesting, dynamic place to work. And I saw all these people coming in and they looked different and some of them were acting kind of weird. And, at first I was like, what the hell did I get myself into here? And then after just a few days, I absolutely fell in love with working with these people. The disabilities they had, it didn't seem to bother them. Their attitudes were great. They were motivated. They wanted to try to excel and improve. And I was just blown away. And I knew right then, after a couple of weeks of being around these folks, I said, this is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. And I'm sure some of you have had that same experience. So I think talking about group homes and that model and alternative living situations for people with disabilities, which we're on the cusp of doing. I believe we're a little behind where we should be, but we'll talk about that in some detail. So I think this is a fitting end to the journey of talking about and supporting people with intellectual disabilities, because as I started to work with these folks in the 80s in Connecticut, that is also the time that they were shutting down the institutions, particularly the infamous Mansfield Training School. So all of a sudden, there was this movement to place people, in some cases, some very complicated people with severe, profound disabilities, into the community after living their entire lives in these segregated, isolated institutions. And that was quite a challenge, but it fascinated me because I was so against the institutional model, because what I had learned about these people so quickly is they can enrich our lives. Why would we want to remove them? Why would we want to isolate them? We should be around them more because there's so much to learn from them. So most of my career at that point was developing group homes for people that were moving from institutional settings into the community. And at the time, that was to catch me out. I mean, that was as good as it gets. But here we are 35 years later, and I'm going to make the argument today, that's not quite so good anymore. And here's why. I think we're on the cusp of the end of an era. Group homes had their place, they had their time, but I'm not so sure that a lot of them do anymore. And I'll get into some detail as to why I believe this quite strongly. So let's talk about a couple of the problems. And if any of you attended last month's webinar about group home living, why can't we all just get along? We talked about the dynamics between the people of actually living in the group home setting. Now I'm going to talk about group homes more holistically as a model. So let's talk about it. It is not normal for 3 or 4 unrelated people or more to live together essentially forever. It's just not normal. I doubt that any of us, all of the people that are attending today, I doubt any of us live, and I'm sorry if I'm offending anybody if you do, but I'm willing to bet that there may not be any of you that live with 3 or 4 unrelated people. Maybe you do temporarily, maybe you do that when you're in college, when you have roommates and you're trying to pay a rent and yet your funds are limited, but that's not your life plan. That's not where you want to be forever with these folks. And unfortunately, the group home for a lot of people is basically a dead end. There's no movement from there. Back in the day, we used to think of group homes much differently than I think we do today. It was a stepping stone. It was a starting point. The emphasis was always to teach people skills, to get behaviors under control, to make people as independent and autonomous as they could be. So at some point, they could move along some continuum and get out of the damn group home. But now I seem to see a lot more now the attitudes of, once a group home, always a group home. And I think it's pretty sad. Let's talk very honestly about the cost. Wow, it's expensive. The cost of group home care is prohibitive and typically averages well over $100,000 per person per year, depending upon the state. Now, there's a lot of variability in the cost, but I don't care what state you're in, it costs a lot of money. It costs a lot of money. So if you have 4 people living in a residence with any type of 24-hour staffing, you could easily be talking $500,000 a year. That is a lot of money. I'm not saying folks aren't worth it. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just putting it out there. With all of the competing forces out there, with all the different groups advocating for money, almost all of which are very worthy, that's a lot of money to commit in perpetuity to support group home living. I don't think it can be sustained. Many group home residences have not really achieved the type of community integration we were hoping for when this model was first developed and embraced. I think this is true. There's a lot of variability when I say this, so please don't take this comment globally. I know a few agencies and a few residences that do a great job with community integration. People are out and about and involved. and active members of their community and have made friends outside of the residence and have significant relationships and are very actively engaged and involved socially, community-based wise. But I'm telling you, my experience is that is the exception and not the rule. And that's a sad statement. Because you can be segregated whether you live in Southbury Training School, on the beautiful grounds in Southbury, Connecticut. Or you can be segregated if you're living in a group home with 3 other peers and you never get out and you don't have much of a life and you don't do anything. What's the difference? Well, the difference is, I won't get into it. I would argue philosophically, maybe the difference isn't quite as great as what we were hoping it would be. Because people move from those types of residences, meaning institutions, to give them opportunities that they never would have had while they were living in that alternative type of facility. So if we haven't maximized that, and I don't believe we have, and we haven't done everything in our power to get these people all the exposure and opportunities that in true integration, what have we really done? We've kind of set up, you've heard the term before, we've set up a mini institution in some cases. And again, I love group homes for some people in some situations that are operated by some agencies that have the right philosophies and the right perspectives. Of course, that's all subjective on my part, but many times I don't see this. Now, let's talk about another factor. Recently, and most assuredly, ongoing staff shortages make this model less and less tenable. Every agency out there during the 2 freaking years of this pandemic that never seems to go away has struggled mightily with recruiting, retaining, hiring staff. It's a nightmare, and it isn't going to end. It's not only not going to end because of this. I got to be careful what I say. I don't want to offend anybody. Not only is it not going to end because of the pandemic situation and the way the play that keeps getting, it's not going to go away because we don't pay these people anywhere near a competitive wage to do this incredibly challenging, difficult work. We don't, and we probably never will, because none of the people living in these residences bring in any revenue. They don't pay taxes for them, right? So they're living off of federal and state entitlements, which is fine. They're absolutely entitled to it and should be. But at $500,000 a year for 4 people, they're not bringing in any revenue. We're having trouble getting staff. That's going to be an ongoing struggle. Many houses haven't obtained true community integration or anything nearly comes close to that. Last but not least, and again, I love group home living for some folks, so please don't take offense when I'm kind of bashing the model. I've made my entire career working and supporting people in group homes, so I don't want to sound too negative. It's worked well for me. This model does not really provide opportunity to focus on the individual's wants, needs, and desires, as opposed to having to accommodate or prioritize what is best or required for the group. Kind of like your kid, if you're a parent who gets sent to a classroom, and the teachers have to teach 20 or 30 kids at the same time. Is that individualized instruction? Hell no. Hell no. It's group instruction for the masses, so that everybody can kind of be brought along at a similar pace. But the differences in the ability of those children in that classroom can be profound. The same is true when it comes to people living in a group home setting. Some people need skill acquisition in certain areas, and some people need skill acquisition in other areas that even aren't remotely similar. And yet we may not be able to tailor individualized programming quite to the extent we'd like, because the focus needs to be on the group. And the group is the 3 or 4 unrelated people that are living together. So now that I've completely trashed the group home model, which I actually like in many cases, I'm simply trying to point out to you, and some of you probably agree with some of my perceptions, some of the shortcomings of living in a group home. So let's talk about alternative models, because that's what this webinar is all about. If group home living is a dying breed, and I believe it is, and the people that don't want to admit it are in denial, but I say, let's start planning now, folks. Let's not wait till the dam breaks. If the water's rising, let's start looking at what we can do, because once the funding for these group homes is reduced dramatically or eliminated entirely, what's our backup plan? So I'm going to share a couple of thoughts with you. I love what we call shared living. Now, depending upon where you're located and what state you're in, and even in many cases with these webinars, what country you're in, you may call this something different than shared living. In the Northeast, and it can vary, we tend to call this model that I'm about to describe shared living. This model involves a person or family indicating an interest in supporting an individual with developmental disabilities. Now, I'm going to get into this a little bit because, well, the motivations of why people want to become shared living providers vary widely. Let me put it that way. That's being kind. Usually SLPs, and I'm not referring to a speech language pathologist, usually shared living providers consist of an individual or family who knows the person and has possibly provided a supports to that person in an alternative setting. So I've had a lot of experience with shared living over the years, in addition to my experience with group homes. Not as much, but a pretty significant amount. And usually people that are shared living providers are not strangers to the person. They're not just out shopping for a person with a disability to move into their house so they can support them and assist them and get a little extra revenue. That's usually not how it happens. Usually it's a person that has met the individual, that might even have worked with the individual, that might have an ongoing friendship with the individual, and they decide that they want to take that relationship to the next level. Because to me, shared living is a very, very, very serious commitment, preferably for life. Not always. That's how I view it. What happens a lot in agencies, I'm just going to tell you how it oftentimes goes. Oftentimes in an agency that runs group home residences, if the staff works with an individual for many years, maybe leaves to take another job in a different field, in a different agency, is no longer employed by the agency, but maintains a lot of affection and admiration and positive thoughts and feelings about the person that they were able to support while they were employed by the agency, and maybe they have an ongoing mutual relationship. That would be awesome. And at some point, a decision is made that shared living might be a viable option for that person who was living in that group home situation. That person oftentimes will step up and go, I'd love to have Joe. I love Joe. Joe's like a family member to me. This is what I hear a lot. Joe's always come to my house and spent holidays with me and my family. We truly value him as a member of our, it's like having another son. We'd love, and it'd be an honor. And I'm like, okay, this is off to a good start. Because people that are motivated like that are usually going to become good, reliable, responsible shared living providers. You may have to, the supported individual typically moves into the shared living provider's existing home or apartment. In some cases, alternative housing or modifications may be required so that the person can be adequately served. Handicapped accessibility. Now, making someone's home truly handicapped accessible is a lot of money. So you usually don't see that. But if we're talking about having to get a reasonably short ramp, if a person's in a wheelchair to be able to get into the house, and maybe do some minor modifications to the bathroom to remove the threshold, so that's not a traditional tub and more of a roll-in shower. Minor modifications like that, usually you can get different funding agencies to support, assuming that the person is going to be there indefinitely. But that's usually not part of the deal, but it's not a deal breaker. It can be done. So that shouldn't discourage you if you're thinking about becoming an SLP. And again, I'm talking globally, again, because of the diversity of the audience that we have. Different states, different countries certainly do things differently. I'm trying to share with you my experiences, so what you actually might have in your specific locale might be a slight deviation from what I'm describing. Usually, the shared living provider receives a monthly tax-free stipend for providing services and supports to or for the individual. The amount can vary widely. So let's throw out $3,000 a month. Don't hold me to that figure, but that's in the ballpark. So that's $36,000 a year tax-free that a shared living provider can make, and most shared living providers work full-time. That's pretty much an expectation. They're probably not going to live on just 36. Maybe they could, but they probably wouldn't. So there's a monthly tax-free stipend that is paid to the provider for providing all of the services for that individual that would similarly be provided in a group home model type of situation. Person is treated as a true member of the family. It's a beautiful thing, folks. When you see this in action and you see it done right, and people are sincere and loving and caring, I don't think there's anything better than this. If it meets all of those parameters that I just described, it doesn't always, but when it does, I truly believe this is just a beautiful model. And as I'm saying here, my personal bias is this can be a great model for supporting individuals with disabilities, because I believe it can be. It is not uncommon that 2 or 3, even 3 people can be supported for the cost of supporting a single person in a group home model or setting. So again, just for the sake of argument, take my $125,000 figure, ballpark, per person living in 24-hour supported group home, annual cost per year. If I'm paying a shared living provider 36 grand per person, 3 people is going to cost me $108,000. 3 people served to 1 person, cheaper. 3 people served for cheaper than I can serve 1 person in a group home setting. And if it's done properly, a better, more individualized, more natural, I would argue, because you don't have staff coming in and out every shift. And this is my family. These are the people I live with. These are the people who love me. When this is done properly, guys, this can be a really, really beautiful thing. Some of my most enjoyable experiences have been with people that have moved into shared living and have absolutely thrived and flourished as a consequence of that. All right, let's do poll question 1.
Okay, everyone. So the group home model tends to be very expensive and costly. True or false? If you've never been to one of our webinars before, then this is what the poll questions look like. Just put your answer right into the multiple choice interface. If you have any trouble with it, then you can put your answer in like a Word document or the body of an email, and you can send it to me after. And just make sure that you do answer if you want to earn your CEUs. But I am going to shut this down in 3, 2, and 1. Okay, so it looks like 96% said true and 4% said false.
Oh my God, we didn't get 100% on that? Okay, well, it is very expensive and costly. So I'll move on. Hold on, I think I jumped to a slide. Okay. Now, I told you how wonderful I believe shared living is, and I think it is. Generally speaking, I think it's a phenomenon. The answer, by the way, was true, the first poll question. It is very costly and expensive. So these are some of the problems. Not all of them, but some of the major ones that I've experienced with shared living. So here's problem number 1. In some states, shared living providers are allowed to have as many as 3 or 4 individuals living with them. This is not optimal or even acceptable, in my opinion, for several reasons. Well, without belaboring the point, what are a couple of the reasons? Well, if you have 3 or 4 unrelated people living together in a shared living provider's residence, isn't that basically the same as a group home? I see a lot of similarities there. 3 or 4 unrelated people living under one roof. That's kind of how we describe a group home. Unfortunately, in some states, this is allowed. I don't like it. I don't condone it. I don't think it's acceptable. If I were in charge, and I'm not, I wouldn't allow it. I believe the maximum, based on my 35 plus years of experience, the maximum amount of people that should be living with a shared living provider is one, possibly two. Max. Why? Well, for lots of reasons. You're only one family. Maybe you're a single person that's providing care to two separate people. Plus you work a full-time job. Plus you've got to coordinate all of their care, medical appointments, everything else, schedule, plan, everything. That's a lot of work. To do it right, to do it well, to do it with commitment and really substantively, that's a lot of work. I have seen some exceptional shared living providers that can manage two people and do a phenomenal job. I have had some experiences with some agencies. I won't mention their names. I'd like to, but I won't. That have shoehorned 3 or 4 people into one shared living provider's residence, and I don't like it. There's just no. And then, think of it this way, guys. The cynical part of me coming out. It's before the major holidays, so I'm ashamed of myself. So if I've got 4 people living with me, right, and I'm getting 36 grand a year for each one of them, oh, not bad. 72 times 2, 144,000 a year, tax free. Give me some more. I'll take some more. Come on. The money should never be the primary incentive or main incentive why people become shared living providers. Ever. Ever. I'm not saying it's not a nice benefit. It is. I'm not saying they don't deserve to get paid. They do. I'm not saying they shouldn't be doing this for free, because that's probably unreasonable. I certainly think it would be. So I'm not faulting them for getting what they got coming, because they're entitled to every penny. And as I said before, this is a much more cost-effective model. But 3 or 4, no, I don't like it for many, many reasons. Here's a problem that I've seen a lot. Adequate respite is oftentimes not built into the shared living provider's contract. This can cause resentment and potential burnout if the SLP and or supported person never get a break from one another. So, hey, I'm just being real. If you live with someone 24/7, it could be your significant other. they can get on your nerves. Could be your kids. They can get on your nerves too. I hope you're taking this with the humor with which it's intended. People need to get away. People need to take a break. It's normal. It's natural. It's a good thing. For many of these contracts, it may be different now because I haven't done direct shared living in a few years, but this was a stumbling block in a lot of the old contracts. Or the other thing I oftentimes see is respite is provided by a family member of the shared living provider, which may not be a bad thing, but it could be a bad thing. Because I've met some family members of shared living providers that were very appropriate and acceptable and loving with the individual, but maybe their blood relative wasn't so nice, or didn't treat them with the same dignity and respect. So just because you're blood related doesn't, to me, necessarily mean that, oh, well, he's with my cousin, who's getting paid, by the way, to provide respite. That doesn't give me a warm, fuzzy feeling. I want to know that that person has all the values and all the characteristics that I'm looking for to take care of that person to the standard that my expectation is, which is very high. There's another problem potentially with shared living. Since there is very little regulatory oversight in most SLP models, abuse or neglect of the supported person can take place, and it can be extremely difficult to detect. The beauty of the shared living model is that a person moves in, they become a member of the family in the optimal way of thinking about this. They're embraced, they're loved, they're valued, they're respected, they're appreciated. That's what I want to see happen. However, I'm not naive not to realize that there are times when, if a person has behavioral challenges in a residence, that the shared living provider, because there's very little oversight, there's very little formal training, shared living providers. I can be honest with you. part of the beauty of the model, but it's also one of the downfalls of the model. They might do some things or start imposing their will on the person or start imposing restrictions on that person. You live in my house, this is the way we're going to do things. You can go off the rails real quick when you start acting and thinking and operating that way. So this is just something to be mindful of. This happens a lot too, and this is sad. If the person is supported by a couple and the couple decides to eventually break up, this can have a significant impact on the supported person. So I've had people that have lived with a husband and wife, or it doesn't matter, two men that live together, two females. It doesn't matter to me. It's not the point of this, of my sharing this story. It's when a person moves in with a couple that have a significant relationship, and that couple fractures or breaks up. That can be very difficult for the person with the disability, because they learn to love both of you. You see, they love you. They love you both. So when one of you moves on, for whatever reasons that they have no control over, think about children of divorce. I mean, pretty similar. Can be devastating. So that can be something to think about as well. All right, let's talk about. So I've given you some of the pros, which I think are far higher than the cons of shared living. A couple of other alternative models that we talk about. And again, the acronyms might be different. What we call these models might be different depending upon what state you're in, what country you're in, whatever. But we also have something that's reasonably similar to shared living called adult foster care, or AFC. And we also have a model called community training homes, which I'll abbreviate as CTH. And I'll describe, these are alternatives to 24-hour staffed group home living that we opened up the presentation describing what that entails and some of its limitations. These are alternative living arrangements as well that should be considered when we're looking to provide optimal supports for each and every person based on their individual needs and desires. Adult foster care and community training homes are similar versions of the shared living provider model. No, they're not identical. And I'm not going to get into all the distinctions between the two, because as I said, depending upon what state you're in, what country you're in, there's going to be some variability here. There may be slight differences regarding what type of licensure and or regulatory oversight will be provided amongst these models. So one of these might involve more of a formal licensing where someone has to maintain, I believe, like in some community training homes, you have to be a licensed CTH provider. That involves annual inspections, making sure that you have certain safeguards in place, environmentally, maybe a means of egress in case of a fire and all that kind of stuff that you may not necessarily require in some kind of a more traditional setting. So there could be some regulatory issues or obstacles that the AFC or the CTH provider might have to deal with and overcome if they want to provide this type of support and service. There might also be differences in rates of compensation and or whether or not some or all of the services may be covered by insurance. So again, I can't be too specific because of the diversity of the audience and the group that we're speaking to and how much states can vary. But, the insurance might pay for some of this. In other models, they won't pay for any of it and everything in between. So this is all something that needs to be explored and looked into before one decides, A, if they want to become a provider, and B, whether or not the person for whom this type of living situation is being considered, whether or not it's the right fit for them. This is all about the right fit. All of these models, shared living provider, the adult foster care, and the community training home, are generally superior to a group home living paradigms, in my opinion, if properly developed and constituted. So again, let me put in one of my famous disclaimers. Not for all people, not for everyone. There are people that I've met, I'm not going to go into detail, that probably will always require a group home model and group home level of care. End of discussion. I don't think there's anywhere near as many of them as we used to think there were, because I think a lot of people can be successful in some of these alternative models. Let me just take a break real quick and see if there's any questions before I move on to the next slide.
No, there isn't.
That's always scary. It's always, I never know how to interpret that. All right. Let's talk about individual supports. So this is yet another model. So we've talked about group home living. We all know about that, right? Because probably most of us have spent the majority of our careers dealing with people living in group homes. And people don't even like group homes anymore. I'm not a fan of it. Some different states out here in the Northeast, Connecticut, Massachusetts, they tend to call them CLAs, community living arrangements. That sounds nicer than a group home. It's all about what we call it and what we label it. And what we label it today will be different than what we call it tomorrow. The language will change and whatever. I don't get too caught up in that stuff because I think it's more of a facade. I'm more of a substance kind of guy. So let's talk about individual supports. I happen to really, really like this model. However, there are well-known problems with good old individual supports. I have had quite a bit of experience. Well, not quite a bit. That's an overstatement. I've had an ample amount of experience with people living in individual supports. Some positive, some exceptionally positive, some of it very bad, and everything in between. This is a model where supports are individually tailored to the person's individual needs. So think about the difference here, even from a shared living model. The shared living provider is pretty much always there. Although that's not true, because people can get home alone time and unsupervised time. People can go into the community without supervision. All of that can happen depending upon a person's skill sets. Are they safe? Are they likely not to be taken advantage of? Are they vulnerable? Whatever. So there's assessments that have to be done to determine if a person can truly be unsupported for hours at a time. But I like the individual supports model because it truly focuses on the individual's needs uniquely. And we tailor them around that person, theoretically, that this is what we're supposed to be doing. So oftentimes, this is what individual supports means to me. Oftentimes, an individual is able to live in his or her own apartment by themselves or with a roommate. Roommates are fine. They can share expenses. And a staff person provides a specified number of hours of support weekly to assist the person with various tasks and activities. And I'm just giving you some of the general stuff that they do. And this is not meant to be limited to just this, but some of the most fundamental things that people tend to need help with: budgeting, making sure their living environment is clean and sanitary. That's a big one, folks. I've had a lot of people in individual supports that actually ended up getting evicted by the landlords because the place was it's hard to describe. Nothing, no conditions you'd want to live in, trust me. Making sure the individual is not being taken advantage of by others. So the reality, and you guys know, the ones of you that have followed me, you know I'm a realist. You know I tend to kind of tell it like it is. I think I do. People living in individual supports, because of their minimal amount of monitoring and supervision and support that they get, are very vulnerable to being taken advantage of. And trust me, there's a lot of nasty people out there in the world that are just looking people that they can take advantage of. And unfortunately, our folks sometimes right at the front of the line, as sad as that is. So you need to keep an eye out for this. Checking for any evidence of drug or excessive alcohol problems or issues. So the reality is that when people live on their own with supports, they are vulnerable to illegal and illicit drugs, developing a dependency on alcohol. They're vulnerable to more mental health issues, depression, feeling isolated if they don't have a really good support social network. They are subjected and they're vulnerable to the same things that we all are. But obviously, because of all of the other issues that they unfortunately experience, they're more vulnerable. So you really need to keep an eye out for this. I've worked with many, many people in individual supports that have become borderline alcoholics or have started to get involved with drugs, drug dealing, drug taking, aligning themselves with people that take drugs, inviting people into their apartment to stay there that take drugs. It can get ugly very quickly. And you know what? It can spiral out of control because oftentimes the amount of monitoring these people are getting is pretty minimal. So there's a very tender balance here between the love I have for this model, which is significant, and the awareness that I have of how quickly it can go downhill if it's not tailored properly and the person isn't being supported and monitored to the extent that I believe they need to be. Another thing that typically happens in individual supports, point number 3, it's very common for individuals who have their own place to become competitively employed. It's a beautiful thing, especially given the current job market situation. 11.5 million people, 11.5 million jobs, last I heard, unfulfilled. I don't really care what the percentage of unemployment is. From my perspective, I look at how many people are in need of help, because that's where I'm always thinking where my priority is, because I got a lot of people that I work with who have a disability that would really like a job. And some of them are exceptionally capable and some of them need a little bit of work. But with the job market right now, the way it is, man, this is a great time to want a job and get a job, where maybe, a couple of years ago, maybe you didn't have quite the opportunities that you have today. So I think there are tremendous opportunities for our folks who may have historically been considered unemployable to now become employed. I think this is a great opportunity for our people. Getting to work, having a job, we know what it does for all of us. We all kind of need it. It gives us a sense of accomplishment, of value. It's a different network of people. It's part of our routine, but it gets us out of our routine. We're making a wage. We're hopefully, making a living where we can support ourselves. There's tremendous value in having a job. And the vast majority of people living in group homes that I've experienced don't have competitive jobs. Yes, there are some that do. Most go to what we call a rehabilitation program. Most do volunteer work. Piecework and that kind of model has pretty much been eliminated because some unethical employers were taking advantage of people by underpaying them. So we've eliminated the model in most places. That's a story for another day. But I do think the opportunities for people with any type of disability to get gainful employment now is as great as it's ever been for them. And that's a beautiful thing. If developed, I should have capitalized the F. If developed and supported properly, this type of model provides the supported person with the maximum amount of independence and autonomy. It's tailored to the individual. It maximizes their taking responsibility for themselves, which can sometimes be a problem because they may not have all the skills in that area we think they do. And if we've underestimated the amount of supports they need, they might become vulnerable to all the things that I described can potentially happen. All right, let's go with poll question number 2.
Okay, everyone. So the individual supports model can be tailored to a person's individual needs. True or false? Alrighty. You guys are voting really, really quickly, so I am going to shut this down in probably like 3, 2, and 1. Okay. So it looks like everyone said true.
Good. So again, as I'm ahead of my schedule as far as my timeline here, I just want to reiterate, all of these models that I'm talking about today, particularly shared living and individual supports, both of which you can tell I'm a little bit biased towards by my own admission, can really, really be wonderful models of support if they are done with careful planning, with very good knowledge of the person that the model is being proposed for. Because a lot of these folks, particularly, if you're moving from a group home living situation, if you're a person who was supported there, with one of the residents there, and you're moving on to something like individual supports, which is it's relatively rare. I'm not saying it hasn't been done. I've seen people go from group home living to individual supports. I can't think of a lot of folks because that's like going from A to Z. But one of the reasons why I can think of the people that are coming up in my mind right now, I can think of several of them. One of the reasons why were they able to do that is because I would argue they were inappropriately placed in group home supports in the first place. In other words, they really didn't meet the criteria in retrospect for what 24-hour group home living provides. The level of supervision, support, oversight, which many people need. The biggest problem that I have with everything we're discussing today is the way that we think about these things. When I got involved in this field back in the 80s, group home living was never the be all end all. It was never meant to be. It was never thought of that way. And I think we've gotten lazy. Well, I don't think, I know we've gotten lazy. The challenge was, again, with rare exception, if you have a person who's profoundly intellectually disabled with multiple physical handicaps that needs 24-hour nursing support and assistance, and I could go on, but I don't want to belabor the point. That person is likely, let's just be real, that person is likely to always require 24-hour group home types of supports because that's the model where all of that stuff can be provided. Would I want to send that same person with all those profound physical handicaps and needs and treatments and then put them in their own apartment and then hope that the local VNA was going to be, what, are you crazy? I wasn't born yesterday. What do they say? I may have been born at night, but I wasn't born last night. That's one of the old expressions. So the level of care, in these other models is disproportionately less available and less provided in most cases than it would be in that traditional 24-hour group home. So there is definitely some benefit for the group home model for some folks. But again, this is all about assessing people's individual differences, needs, respecting everybody's uniqueness. And I don't know about you guys in attendance today. One of the most persistent questions I get asked with the people that I'm privileged to support in my livelihood, getting around like I do. When I go and I meet and talk to people, I do all the time, one of the burning questions that they have for me is, Kev, when can I get out of here? When can I get my own place? When can I get my own apartment? When that many of the people that I work with, that is a persistent theme, a persistent desire, and I think as much as we can, we need to respect that. Any questions before I move on?
Nope.
Wow. See, this is why I'm thrown off. I was expecting at least some questions. All right. Let's talk about possible pitfalls of individual supports. And some of them I'm alluded to, but let me get into a little bit more detail because these are serious and they're significant. These can be deal breakers. First of all, supported persons are easy targets to be taken advantage of by unscrupulous acquaintances. Now, an acquaintance could be someone that they meet on the street and they become an acquaintance, or at least that's how they ingratiate themselves. Hey, you're my buddy. Where do you live? Well, I've got an apartment just down the road there. I just moved in. Really? You live by yourself? I'm role playing here, but follow along. Yeah, I just moved in. I was living in a group home, but now I'm living on my own. I love it, man. It's awesome. Really? Yeah. And what, you're all by yourself? Really? Nobody checks up on you? Well, once in a while, but pretty much I'm on my own. Yeah, let me check out your place. You want to come down and visit? Yeah, let me go take a look. All right, yeah, I'd love to show it to you. I'm so proud of it. So what I've just given you is a little dialogue of how quickly something that looked innocent. And these dialogues, I've seen them play out, can turn bad very quickly. So now this person who's acting like, and maybe they're sincere, maybe it's a beautiful thing. I'm not saying that everybody's got bad intent, but unfortunately I seem to come across more than my share. So, they get a layout. Hey, you got a second room over there. What are you using that for? I don't really use that room. It could be, it's not really occupied for anything. Hey, I don't really have a place to live right now. Would you mind if I moved in with you? I can help you pay the rent. Really? Yeah, yeah. And then you don't have to be by yourself all the time. I know how difficult that can be. I'm kind of on my own, so that would be cool. And before you know it, guys, this has happened to me. I'm not making this stuff up. You got a second person who's moved in. Nobody knows a damn thing about him. The lease is in violation because the landlord stipulated it was a one-bedroom apartment that was designated for a single occupant. Do you see how quickly what is a good situation can go bad? Trust me, it can happen. And once that ball gets rolling in that bad direction, it can be very difficult to stop. So when I talk about monitoring these situations, this is the kind of monitoring I'm talking about. Involvement with drug and/or alcohol abuse, if not carefully monitored, can be a serious problem issue. I neglected to say it here, but another big problem can be, I don't know why I didn't put it in here because it's common. Weight gain and obesity. Weight gain and obesity. I have seen people move into their own apartments, into their own living situations with minimal supports and put on unbelievable amounts of weight. I had one guy, I'm not going to mention his name, but I'm thinking of him right now, that I had the privilege of working with who lived in a group home for a while. And now this is tough to talk about. But he advocated very hard for himself that he wanted to get the hell out of there. And I knew why he wanted to get out of there. He wanted to drink. He wanted to do drugs. Trust me, I knew this guy pretty damn well. And unfortunately, the system allowed him to advocate for himself, and he moved out of that group home where he wasn't able to do all these things. And to make a long story short, he was dead within the year. I think he was in his mid to late 20s. And someone sent me a picture of him walking down the street. I hadn't seen him for about a year. Someone sent me a picture of him walking down a street of a community, and I couldn't believe it was the same person. I just couldn't believe it. How he looked, the weight, and very, very sad. And he died. And what saddens me about that case, and that's not the only one, if I knew, and I did, with certainty, that he was going to have all of these temptations and be subjected all of these vices and succumb to them, as he readily did. And he died a year later. Boy, somebody missed the mark. I'm not trying to find blame here, but I'm saying that kind of a situation, if you know the individual as well as I knew this gentleman, that should never happen. Because we should plan for that. We should anticipate that. We should build in supports to prevent or preclude that. Or here's an idea, maybe decide that that model is inappropriate for that person because we know that they're going to immediately succumb to all of the things that they're telling us they're going to succumb to. And then we allow it to happen anyway. Shame on us. I'll get off of that because it's a sticky wicket for me. Loneliness and isolation can be a major problem, major issue for some. You know, people are used to living with other people. People are used to having staff around all the time. Boom. All of a sudden, they get 10 hours a week. Well, if they don't have a social network, if they don't have an involved family, if they don't have a significant other, you can see how quickly the loneliness and the isolation can be a factor, which then can sometimes lead to seeking out alcohol, inappropriate friends. You see how this is all intertwined? Because it is all intertwined. And there's a way to avoid this if we do our homework. It's shameful when we know these people as well as we do, and we allow them. And I don't mean that in the sense that we're their keeper. We're not our keeper. But if I can predict with virtually 100% certainty that a person is going to succumb to all of these problems and issues and be dead within a year, I didn't predict that. Though I wasn't surprised. I thought he would live longer than that, honestly. Then we shouldn't be setting people up for this. That's not being kind. That's not being compassionate. That's not being human. That's not being helpful. That's throwing someone to the wolves. Why would we do that? Aren't we in human services because we want to help people? Isn't it why we all do what we do? I hope it is. So allowing what I just described to you to happen is so bizarre and foreign to me. I can't believe we allow it to happen. And you know what? It continues to happen. That really bothers me. Supported persons may allow people that they perceive as friends to move in or stay with them when in need at no expense, potentially creating a flophouse. So that little dialogue I went through with you, that little fake dialogue, which is not that far removed from actual dialogues, which I've heard, can happen and spiral out of control very quickly. So here's the last pitfall. It's not pitfall, but it's a sign. Something you should all be aware of if you're involved in providing supports in this type of model. If the supported person begins to deny access to the staff that are scheduled to visit or support them, there can be issues with the agency receiving payment for those services, even though the support staff was scheduled and available. So here's the way it works in some states. I don't know about all states, and I don't pretend to. I only know what I know, and even then I question what I know. But the way a lot of these programs are set up, if I go to Joe's house, because I'm the scheduled staff, and I tell Joe, just follow me along. So I tell Joe, I'm going to stop by your house on Saturday at about noontime. I want to make sure, your place is clean. If you need any help picking anything up, I'll give you a hand. Let's go out and do some grocery shopping, because I know, like me, you tend to buy a lot more junk than you should. So let's do that together. And, we'll kind of go over your finances and see what things are. How's that sound? And Joe says, yeah, great. Okay, well, I'll probably be over there for 2 or 3 hours. So expect me about noon, and I should be out of your hair by about 3. And Joe says, okay. So here's what can happen. And this has happened to me and others. I go over there to support Joe, who I thought I had a pretty good relationship with. And Joe answers the door. And he says, hey, Kev, you know what? I don't need any help today. And I look at him quizzically like, what do you mean you don't need any help? I thought we had a plan. I thought we had a date. I thought we set some things up. Yeah, but everything's good. Everything's good. I've got my apartment's clean. My point is this: when they start denying you access, that can be a sign that some things may be going on that they don't necessarily want you to know about. But the problem is even bigger, because some state agencies won't pay that support staff for scheduling their time, showing up to provide the supports. If they're denied access and the person doesn't allow them to spend the 3 hours with them that they've allocated, I believe that staff person should be paid for that time, because through no fault of their own, are they not providing the support? You following me here? I don't know how different states work. I'm very curious about this because I think it's a pitfall. And you know what? I'm going to tell you this: a lot of agencies don't want to do shared living. I mean, they don't want to do individual supports. Excuse me, for exactly the reason I just described. It's a money loser. It's difficult to provide. It's not consistent. People's needs can wax and wane. How many hours do they need? How many hours can I provide? When are they going to be home? Or what if I go there and they're not home and they don't let me in? I don't get paid for it. How am I going to survive? I'm a nonprofit, right? These are all real issues that need to be acknowledged. Because, like Dr. Phil says, you can't change what you don't acknowledge. Any questions about any of that?
Not yet.
Nothing. Are you sure anybody's out there today?
Yeah, I am getting some.
I don't know. I'm beginning to wonder. All right, let's move on. So here's a couple more pitfalls of the shared living model. I'm sorry, I keep getting that shared living in my head because I love it so much. Individual support pitfalls. As I just said, when the supported person begins to deny services or entrance, this is oftentimes an indication that something untoward, illegal, or illicit might be taking place. So you'd be incredibly naive to just walk away from meeting Joe at his front door, who's only cracking the door because he doesn't want you to see what's going on inside. Trust me, been there, done that. And I'm kind of trying to look in. No, everything's okay. No, well, why can't I look in? There's no need. Everything's good. No problem. Okay. I walk away and I go, okay, there's a problem. There's a problem. Interestingly, sadly, sometimes a person's parents or guardians may have mixed feeling about a loved one being able to live with less than 24-hour supports. So this is not traditional behavioral analytic thinking or training here. This is the psychodynamics of I've had many parents that truly love their sons and daughters or whatever that they put in group home situations, that are very happy with the quality of care that they're getting there. And it may come to the point where that individual, because this is what we're supposed to be doing, we're proposing some type of alternative model to give them more autonomy, independence, and responsibility. And sometimes you'll get a battle. It's very interesting, and I think I know why. Oh, no, he could never live on his own. No, we're very comfortable with Joe being in the group. No, we're not going to allow that. Well, why not? Why not? If that's what Joe wants, isn't this more about Joe than it is about you? I understand you're the parent, and I understand you're the guardian, but let's try to put that aside for just a minute and talk about what Joe really wants and aspires to, and how Joe views the rest of his life and the things he'd like to achieve and accomplish, just like we all have. What are his goals? What are his objectives? What are his aspirations? And what if they're different than yours? Should I be more concerned about what yours are for your son or daughter, or should I be more concerned about what theirs are? And should I be focusing my time and energy on helping them to accomplish those goals and objectives, assuming that they're reasonable? And I think they're there's something that in fact they can accomplish. This gets into the dynamic of guilt. This can be very hard, and I'm not trying to minimize this topic. If I was minimizing it, I wouldn't be talking about it. But parents and guardians can sometimes be an obstacle to people moving into a less supported, structured, regimented, supervised, monitored environment. And for all the reasons that we talked about, all of the potential pitfalls of individual supports, which are so, but I've seen very, very few people that when I've approached parents or guardians from, like, maybe they could go from a group home to a shared living. I still get some pushback on that at times. And I'm going to say something maybe that I shouldn't, but never stopped me before, so why should they be any different? I mean, it's almost the holiday. I think a lot of parents struggle with the idea of a person that they love, their son, their daughter, the person, whatever. If the person that they've supported and followed their whole life can move into a shared living provider's residence and be happy and content and properly supported, then why can't they be living at home? That's a tough question to answer, and I'm not trying to cast aspersions here. I'm just saying that I think that can be a struggle for some parents and guardians, because, particularly parents, because if they can move into a provider who's going to get paid a monthly stipend, and they can be happy and supported and content and get all that they need, assuming that the parents aren't very elderly or compromised. Let's take those variables out of this equation. You could see how that could be problematic. All right, let's jump to poll question 3, please, Marissa.
All right, everybody. So, use or abuse of drugs and or alcohol can be a problem in the IS model. True or false? Thank you guys for voting so quickly. I know it's Friday afternoon, but oh my goodness, everybody voted. I'm shutting it off. Awesome. Sweet. All right. Oh my goodness, and everybody said true.
Oh,
Good.
thank God, because it is true. Sadly
Good.
true. Any questions before we move on to the last slide in discussion? I
Still
can't
no.
believe somebody please take exception to what I'm saying. Tell me I'm all wet. Do something. I can't believe this. I mean, I always take, silence as a sign of agreement, but I don't want to be that naive. If people are offended by anything I've said or take exception to anything I've said. So really, at the end of the day, why are we talking about this, and why is this so important and relevant, and really something that we really need to be on top of? Because this is all about the individual. This is all about the person. Group home living, it's in the name, group. It's a group of people. Maybe that's one of the reasons why they tended to get rid of that. Community living arrangement sounds nicer than, I guess, in a way, than group home. There is actually, I don't want to scare anybody, but I'll just bring this thought up to you, because I find it actually rather frightening. And someone I'm hoping will have a comment or a question about what I'm about to say. I have heard that in some states, because I know a lot of people in lots of different places, and I can't always reveal who they are, but I have heard that there are some states that are actually considering moving people back into institutional type settings. Primarily because of the staff shortages, primarily because of the expense. The main reason being chronic staff shortages. At least that's what I'm hearing. Think about it. A lot of these facilities that were depopulated back in the 80s when I started my career are still empty. Still empty. Property is paid for, owned presumably by the state or the federal government. So I cannot believe that I'm even saying this at the end of 2021, that there is some movement afoot, I believe, it might have some credibility to actually move people back into the very types of locales that we were hell-bent on getting them out of. I haven't actually seen it happen yet, but again, I only know the New England area. That doesn't mean it hasn't happened somewhere else. And I truly would be interested if anyone has heard of anything similar, or if you think I'm totally delusional and making this up, I'm not. This is being proposed by some very quietly, and it may come to pass. But you can see how that is the antithesis of everything. I don't even like 3 or 4 people living together, let alone 50 or 60 people living together in a congregate facility. Oh my goodness. Talk about taking a step backwards. But that could happen. Everything we've talked about today focuses on focusing our emphasis on the individual versus the group. So whether or not it's shared living, whether or not it's individual supports, whether it's adult foster care, whether or not it's community training home, or other models, I'm sure that there are some models where people move back with their biological family members and they get additional support. And that's actually a model that I haven't really talked about because I haven't had much exposure to it. But that is a phenomenal model too. You know, with all the individuals being diagnosed on the spectrum these days, and all of the challenges that they represent, you know, it can be challenging as hell. And some families are willing to keep their loved ones home because they want to, because they don't want to give up someone because they're on the autism spectrum, but they can't do it without some help. So doesn't it make a lot of sense? In a lot of states have moved in this direction of being more proactive and providing supports to the family in their setting so that we can maintain individuals, hopefully indefinitely, and live there and be supported by the family who loves and cares for them. I mean, it doesn't get any better than that if you can do it. But most of my experience, unfortunately, that's more of an early intervention before you turn 22 kind of support model that I quite honestly don't have much experience with. But I think it's a beautiful thing if you can do it and make it work. I think it doesn't get any better than that. Because the whole idea here, if in the optimal situation, at least in my opinion, is never having to have the person be segregated from their family in the first place. All these models involve people being removed or at least distanced from their family members. Another reason why I think looking at these alternative models, this is something that I've oftentimes thought about. I can't get it out of my head. These types of living arrangements tend to allow for much more spontaneous activities to take place, which is oftentimes not the case in a traditional group home type of setting. So if some of you remember back in the day, if there's any of you that are listening today, that first webinar I did on bridging the gap between ABA and adults with developmental disabilities, 10 things we can do better. One of the things I talked about then that always bothered me and continues to bother me is that activities that take place in group homes tend to have to be meticulously planned in advance. You got to make sure the person has spending money. You got to make sure there's gas in the van. You got to make sure you have adequate staffing. You got to make sure that you bought ticket. I'm not saying that all those things aren't necessary, but some of the things that I've experienced in my life that I've enjoyed more than others are things that I just jumped up and did. I mean, if you're living in a group home, to be honest with you, if it's a, if I wake up in the middle of summer and I'm living in a group home and it's 80 degrees and I decide that, what a great day to go to the beach, unless you've done a lot of planning, it's probably not going to happen. And I think that's really sad because not all of the experiences in life that we value and we get great satisfaction out of are planned. I think spontaneity in a lot of group home settings is lacking, if not even possible. So that's kind of why I like some of these alternative models too, because they allow for more spontaneity in doing things on the spur of the moment, so to speak. And I think that's a good thing. It has been my experience that many individuals experience significant behavioral and emotional improvement and stability when placed in an individualized setting as opposed to group living. Right here, I'm talking primarily about shared living. I will absolutely confess to you that I have worked with people, sometimes for extended periods of time, that were very challenging. And someone has decided that that person can move into shared living. And I said, "You're crazy. You're nuts. You're setting this person up to fail." And you know what? Not only have they not failed, they thrived. They've thrived. It's like, I cannot believe this is the same person that I've come to know and love, because behaviorally they're stable, psychiatrically they're exhibiting more stability, psychologically, emotionally, they're flourishing. That's what can happen when an individual is truly embraced by a provider and a family and made to feel like they are valued, appreciated, respected, and most importantly, loved. They can metamorphose, if there is such a word, into something I didn't even imagine they could be. Now, I'm not saying that that happens all the time because I have had my share of people where I said, "You're out of your mind. This person needs much more support than they're going to get in shared living." And I was right. They did the shared living experiment, as I call it, and it crashed and burned in a few months, and they were back in a more supervised, monitored uh, kind of living situation. Not because I'm not happy that they were, but like I said before, there are some people that are going to require more supports, maybe indefinitely, and there are some people, I think, in my opinion, that we move primarily because of the financial um, benefits of it, but we haven't done enough work with the individual to make sure that they can be successful when they get to this less supported, less structured, less monitored models. Opportunities exist for people to have alone time, either in the residence or in the community, which makes people feel more empowered and trusted. So, as I said, the double-edged sword of these models, people don't have alone time if they're in a 24-hour staffed group home. You know what their alone time is? When they go in their bedroom and they shut their door. That's their alone time. But very rarely do they have true alone time, or time where they can demonstrate to people that they can act in a more responsible, reliable, appropriate manner, because oftentimes the model doesn't allow for that to take place. So it's something to think about. I think all of these models that we've talked about today, in closing, I just want to say group homes are awesome for certain people that benefit from them, are always probably going to need that type of level of support. And where I haven't seen that level of support necessarily be successfully replicated in some alternative kind of living model. I think there are people that were always going to require that level of support. But I do think there are many, many, many people that currently live in 24-hour staffed group homes that could live in more individualized settings. If we do the training, if they believe that they can work on the skills that they need to acquire to get there. I think we all need optimism. I think we all need to aspire to things in our life. That's just what makes us human and drives us to do what we do. We all want to be the best that we can become. And I think it's sad when sometimes the model is essentially holding people back. So that's all I've got for today. I hope this has been helpful. I hope it's been enlightening. I hope it'll make you think about the people that you're privileged to work with, as I am every day, and really do some soul searching about what's in their best interest and how you and I, as a small part of their life, might be able to help facilitate that to happen. Because I think that's why we're all here and why we do what we do at the end of the day. I'll take
All
it.
right. Thank you everyone for attending, and Kevin, thank you for doing this for us today. If anybody has any questions, feel free to put them in the questions box. There's only a couple so far. There's literally like 2. So put your feedback and put your questions in the box, and we'll try to get to it. I will have all of your CE instructions for your certificates and all to you on Monday by lunchtime. So just keep that in mind. The certificate that you'll receive in an email after this is going to be your certificate of completion and not your CE certificate. That's coming on Monday. It just takes a couple of hours for the data to populate after a webinar. And so I have to wait until Monday to do it on Fridays. So, okay, let's get to the Q&A part. But so how do we address the staff shortage? This is a huge concern for my agency.
Yeah, if I had the answer to that, boy, if you haven't attended all of my webinars, and I don't expect you to, but one of the things I talked about in one of the webinars several months ago was direct care support professionals cultivating our most valuable resource. Why I remember the name of these webinars verbatim is beyond me and kind of scary. But I talked exactly about that question. There's going to continue to be staff shortages for a few reasons, and I'll just point out what they are. First of all, we don't pay these people anywhere near enough. That's just a fact. Minimum wage or a couple of bucks above minimum wage ain't going to do it. Ain't going to do it. Secondly, we don't look at direct care staff, we don't recruit and retain them with the idea that we're viewing them as career employees, and they don't view themselves as career employees. As long as direct care staff is a stopover job to get to something better and different, and that's the perception of not only the staff, but the agencies accept that perception, you're going to have this chronic problem of retention, recruitment, and turnover. It's not going to go away. How many times have I said, you come into this field with a high school degree or a GED, reliable transportation, hopefully, you can make, it depends on where you are. In some states, you can make 12 bucks an hour, which sucks. In some states, you're going to make 20 bucks an hour. That still sucks. But you're going to make a wage, maybe not a living wage, until people don't have to work 2 or 3 jobs to make ends meet, which is what the norm is in human services. None of these problems that this person astutely points out are going to go away. So do I have an answer to that? I don't have an answer, but I know what we should be doing to try to alleviate this problem. But I'm acknowledging that it's a problem that's not going to go away. Not going to go away. That's the
Okay.
best I can do on that one. I wish I had an answer.
Alrighty, well, this is the last question that we actually have. So, if able to transition out of a group home environment, why would the support person not be a parent?
You'd have to ask the parent. The support person could be the parent, but then we get into the ethics. Should a parent? I'm not sure I understand the question, but if this person is proposing that a parent advocates to become a provider for their own child, I guess I would need more information because I could really get in trouble with this answer. But if a parent is saying, I want to be a provider, I want to take my son or daughter back home, I would say, great. But then you expect to get paid for that? I don't know about that. Um, I don't know about that. I'm not sure I understand the question. Can that person give me any more detail about the question before we end so I can try to answer it properly? Because I'm a little confused what they're asking.
All right, yeah, feel free to put your feedback into the questions box if you have any. But that seems to kind of be all the questions that we have for now. So I'm just gonna kind of try to stall. But as I said, everybody, if you guys need your CEUs, please look out for your certificate instructions on Monday. I'll have all of that data analyzed that day by lunchtime. So it usually comes pretty early in the morning, but I say at lunchtime just in case, depending on your time zone, and sometimes there's a delay. But I'm not getting any more feedback from this person,
Okay,
so we might wrap it up for today if that's okay with you, Kevin.
we're right on time. I think
Yeah.
we're a minute early. And guys, I'll just leave you with this thought. I don't know what the future holds regarding these webinars. I really have enjoyed them. I really have gotten such tremendous feedback from you folks, which validates why I'm doing these, to be quite honest with you. Um, just sharing my experiences. Sometimes I get in trouble for it. Sometimes people are really appreciative. Fortunately, most of the time, people are more appreciative. Um, it's been an absolute honor to do this. So thank you.
All right, everybody. Thank you all for attending today. And Kevin, thank you for doing all of these with us and today, but especially all of these. And as I said about your certificates, look out on Monday. And the certificate that you will receive later on today will be your certificate of completion, not your CE certificate. But everybody, please have a great weekend. And we hope to see you at one of our other future webinars. And Kevin, we hope to, obviously be doing more with you as well.
I hope so.
All right, we'll talk soon. Bye,
Have a
everybody.
great holiday, everybody. Bye bye.